President Ramaphosa says his recent visit to the United States with the South African delegation was centered around three key issues. He says it was to reset a bilateral relationship that had gone sour, strengthen trade and investments, and convince US President Donald Trump to attend the G20 summit here in South Africa. The relationship between the US and South Africa is seen as a doorway of cooperation between the two countries to deal with the scourge of crime and improve infrastructure, among other issues. Ramaphosa was speaking on the sidelines of the 2025 Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium in Cape Town.
When we went to Washington, our key objective revolved around three issues. The first issue was to reset our relationship with the United States. A relationship that had gone sour, a relationship that had gone a little bit bumpy, where statements were being made which were not very helpful. And we felt that we needed to reset that relationship because the United States is a very important player. We export a lot of things to the United States. They export or they bring in a lot of goods as well as services to us. So for us, the United States being the biggest economic powerhouse in the world, we needed to reset the relationship. So in my conversation with President Trump on the phone, I said, "We want to come and see you." And he said, "By all means, please come so that we can discuss a whole range of things." So resetting the relationship was the key issue, one of the key issues. The second one was to set up a process of engagement, to engage on tariffs, to engage on investment, as well as business processes, including AGOA, whether we should carry on with AGOA, whether we should stay in AGOA. So that was primary in our minds, to discuss tariffs, to discuss investment and business relations. And the third thing was to get him to agree to be more favorably disposed towards the G20, because some of his people were pulling out. And we wanted to demonstrate to him that the G20 is important, not only because it's being held in South Africa, but because they, the Americans, initiated or started or established the G20. And so now that it is our time to hand over to them, I told him that I don't want to hand over to an empty chair. So he must come personally so that I can hand over the presidency to him.
Expelled former South African Ambassador to the United States, Ebrahim Rasool, says the idea of an ambush is not too far removed from US President Donald Trump's behavior at the SA-US meeting last Wednesday. During an interview with CNN, he said diplomacy was expected from a superpower. He's also commended the South African delegation for being united, focused and diverse. He joins us now. Thank you very much, Mr. Rasool, for joining us. So the big debate at the moment is whether Trump will attend the G20 summit in November or not. This is based on the president's letter yesterday, which says the US president recognizes the importance of the work of the G8. What are your thoughts around this? And especially when we hear the president in that clip say that he doesn't want to hand over the G20 presidency to an empty chair.
Look, I think that it's very important that South Africa's year of leading the G20 is a successful one. I think that when I was in the USA, there was a fear of an emerging multipolar world, and that 4 years of global South leadership of the G20 may have created a pressure for a multipolar world that could lead to a multilateral world. There was a fear that if there's consensus of most of the G20 and the global South about trading in dollars, that would not favor the USA. And so I can understand the fears of the USA, especially in a time when they are prosecuting a global trade war, and most of the victims of that trade war would be in the G20 and the global South. So I can understand the need to assuage the fears of the United States. But I also think that that is also a leverage over the United States. We shouldn't let the attendance of the United States at the G20 mean that the G20 does not formulate a response to the trade war that the United States has started.
So do you think that ultimately last week's interaction was a success? And depending on what your response is, give us the why.
So I think it was a success in the sense that if South Africa had been able to open up those trade and tariff negotiations, then we've achieved an important purpose. Even if there was just a relief, it was a success because Mr. Trump has promised that he has 100 trade deals that he has lined up, and he's only given us a handful so far after a month or two. And so, by and large, he may need South Africa to be one of those deals that he signs off. Secondly, it was a success in that they did not succeed in forcing South Africa to withdraw its case against Israel for genocide in the ICJ. So we've been able to stand by our principles. And thirdly, I think it was a success because we were able to smile through a very undiplomatic, haranguing, lecturing approach by President Trump in the Oval Office. We did not lose our cool, and we did not fall to a Zelensky moment of bullying this time around. So it's a measured success amidst enormous provocation that I think South Africa had to endure.
Yeah. So there's been quite some controversy around the Minister of Telecommunications and Digital Technology gazetting this direction to ICASA to try and adjust the rules for any future participants who come and play in the ICT sector with people coming to the assumption that it's really to open the door for Starlink. I spoke to him directly last week and he said that's not the reason. They've been working on this paper for the longest time and they just want to bring down the barriers so that investment in the country, particularly in that sector, can be more favorable. What are your thoughts around the timing of this and the idea of trying to get more investment in by relaxing some of the regulations somewhat?
Look, without giving any of the details and the secrets of even my negotiations on the Starlink issue while I was there and before I was there, I think it is a realization by most countries that over the last few months, there is no entry into Washington without the discussion around Starlink. Starlink, while in the so-called prime ministership of Elon Musk of the United States, has expanded across Africa, across Asia, across the world, and many people have seen it as the precondition for getting relief on tariffs and trades and investment from the broader United States. And so I'm not saying that that is the case. I think it is a good thing. I think we need, even if we have to adhere to that precondition, we need it in order to save the bigger picture in South Africa, which is trade and tariffs and investment. But I think that there is no country in the world that have adopted Starlink in the last few months that have not felt the pressure to adopt Starlink.
So we're kind of going back to our previous discussion. What did you make of the unsubstantiated genocide claims that were made by President Trump? And do you think that Team South Africa handled that onslaught particularly well? Because, of course, people on social media who have the benefit of just being spectators and not being there were quite critical about the way that the situation was handled, that stats were not produced and so on and so forth. But of course, many people saying that there was a fear perhaps on the part of the president that there would be a back and forth, which would then deteriorate into a Zelensky moment.
I think that it was always on the cards that the ambush would be about the genocide and the so-called land confiscation. There was no irony in scheduling the official visit a week after the landing of so-called refugees, Afrikaner refugees from South Africa. So it was always going to be the way in which Mr. Trump would claim some kind of victory, having maybe agreed to trade and investment relief for South Africa and giving up on trying to persuade us on the ICJ case in Israel. I think, secondly, that we must also understand that there is no magic in choosing to charge South Africa with genocide after South Africa charged Israel with genocide. There is no magic in understanding that we are accused of confiscating land from white Afrikaners after we accuse Israel of taking land in the West Bank and particularly in Gaza. So there's an attempt to have a moral equivalence on a global stage so that South Africa looks weak, but I think the world has seen the falseness and the dishonesty of the claims against South Africa. South Africa did not have to give stats because we all know the stats, that it's false. The world knows it. But the fact of the matter is that just South Africa's dignity in the face of blatant dishonesty, I think, showed who was the adult in the room and who was not.
Mr. Rasool, thank you very much. We've run out of time, but thank you very much for speaking to us. That was Ebrahim Rasool, the former ambassador to the United States for South Africa.